RubyConf China 2012特别感谢以下赞助商。
大家好，我是弗瑞乌。先讲一下，因为我生活和工作都在澳大利亚，所以对技术方面用中文可能表达不清，所以我这次演讲是用英文讲，所以大家多多包涵。As I said, my name is Fred Wu. I work at a company called Locomote. We're based in Melbourne, Australia, and we're doing a lot of the cooperative travel management platforms. So today the talk will be how to become a better developer. A lot of the points will be related to Ruby, but I think some of the points can be related more generally. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, to give you some context, I was born in Shanghai, then I moved to Australia. In 1997, I've got my very first computer, and at that time I was actually very ignorant about computers. I didn't even know how to turn off a computer properly. So. And then the same year I started using BBS and the internet via 33.6 kilobits per second modem. And the same year I discovered HTML from a computer magazine. I taught myself how to actually write it in Microsoft Front Page Express. Then I moved to Australia, then I started playing around with a lot of different forum softwares from CGI to ASP and eventually moved to PHP. In 2004, I've started learning PHP and JavaScript in school. And then in 2006, I sort of started working as a junior developer part-time whilst I was at university. The same year, I discovered Ruby and discovered Ruby on Rails by DHH's 15-minute blog demo. And then I started working professionally as a web developer, working mainly on HTML, CSS, PHP, and JavaScript. In 2010, I started writing Ruby full-time. And the same year, I started sort of contributing to a lot of different Ruby projects, including Rails. So because I came from Australia, I have to say that Australia actually has a very strong Ruby community. So if you sort of ever wanted to try to explore the opportunities outside of China, welcome to Australia. It's a great place, and we've got a lot of very respectable and very skillful developers. And if you've been using Ruby for some time, then you might recognize some of the faces. They've done a lot of great things for the community. So just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert. I think I'm a student newbie, but because I'm really passionate about the industry, so I wanted to just share a few of my thoughts and tips and things like that. So a couple of thoughts on software development. I think second system syndrome is very dangerous, and I recommend you try to avoid doing it. There's a couple of popular examples. For instance, dig.com, they practically handed over all the users to Reddit. And also Facebook tried a couple of times to rewrite their entire system in some other languages, but they couldn't, so they stuck with PHP. And I think software engineering is like playing StarCraft or any of the real-time strategy games where you can't just focus on your battle, right? You have to also concentrate on the minimap where you can keep track of what's happening globally. And I think this actually took me a few years to realize is that experience is actually as important as talent, if not more. And technical debt is a debt for a reason, so I think you need to balance out hitting your goals versus paying off your technical debt. And I think you should choose your application architecture wisely, and I've got a showcase here. So at Locomote, we're developing a travel management platform, and the platform needs a user profile system to hold user data like emails and passwords. The profile system will potentially be used standalone, meaning we need some kind of API service layer. And we need pluggable modules for the platform to activate and deactivate them dynamically. There will potentially be third-party developed modules, and the development timeline is tight, as always. So we thought about the architecture, and this is what we originally came up with. This is everything here is like an API service. So you've got the profile API service. The platform itself is an API. Sorry, the platform is the front end utilizing the API, and all the modules are actually API services as well. So is it actually perfect? I don't think so, because it will definitely take a lot longer to develop, and you can't guarantee the usefulness of your API layer for third-party developers because you don't have them from day one. And more complexity is almost always leading to more screw-ups. And someone on the team came up with an easy way of doing it. So basically everything is contained within one Rails app. The profile will just be an active record model. All the modules are models as well. So it's really easy to develop. Everyone knows how to develop in Rails. But for how long? I think one app is more difficult to scale out. It's also more difficult to assign tasks to members because you're more likely to have sort of conflict files and things like that. And it is more likely to have leaky code because it's so easy to call objects and methods. So after a while, we came up with a more balanced way. So the profile service is still an API service, but the platform and all the modules are now contained within one Rails app, but all the modules are actually contained within a Rails engine that's been mounted onto the platform itself. And platform and all the modules, they talk through a gateway. So I think a balanced solution is a good solution. We don't over-engineer, but the solution still has a good degree of separation of concern. And internal interfaces are easier to develop than external APIs. So we call them gateway, and within the gateway we can call the controllers of individual modules, and we have a set of defined interfaces to call. All this advanced planning is about avoiding future screw-ups and to avoid moments like this. So because I'm half of a designer, in web design we have a set of principles called CRAP principles. CRAP, they stand for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. You can actually loosely apply this to software engineering as well, but in OOP we have our own set of principles called SOLID principles. They stand for single responsibility, open close, list of substitution, interface segregation, and dependency inversion. I'm not going to go into details. If you're interested, please look it up. And there's also 4 simple rules. Make sure your code passes all the tests, make sure it contains no duplication, make sure it expresses the intent, and make sure it minimizes the number of classes and methods. And some of you might not agree with me, but I really think that you should not learn Rails until you have learned Ruby first. Make sure you understand Ruby, at least the basic stuff, before you jump onto Rails. So all these things, I think the best way is to ensure you learn fast is to practice. And one way to do that is to contribute to open source projects. I think reading code is just as important as writing them. You get to learn from the masters. Sharing, I think, is awesome. And if you make things for yourself, well, make things useful for yourself, somebody else might find it useful too. So here's an example of some of the projects I've contributed to. Rails is on there, Slim is on there as well. After that, I think it might be time for you to open source your own work. if you made something useful, please release it. And you might get some constructive criticisms, but I think you can learn from them, so it's pretty good. You should be proud of your work. And if you're awesome enough, you might be able to make a little dent in the universe. So here's an example of my released projects. This is an interesting graph. This is released by Travis CI, which is a hosted continuous integration service. You can actually ignore the languages on the side. But the main important thing is that if you look at those horizontal lines, open source projects have higher passing rates than commercial projects, meaning that if your code is out in the open, you're more likely to, to care about a little bit more and to ensure you don't, not test or things like that. So, how many of you have heard about Sling? How many of you actually using Sling? Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So a lot of you might know me from this Sling project, so I'll talk about this. So before I talk about Sling, Haml, I'm sure most of you would have heard about Haml, right? So Haml is great. By the way, Sling and Haml, for those of you who don't know, they're both templating rendering engines. So for Haml, it looks like this. That's a Haml template. So it looks pretty clean, but I have a couple of issues with this. First of all, you use hash rockets for HTML tags, HTML attributes. They're just more difficult to type. And you've got percentage signs everywhere. It's just very hard to type. I don't like that. And then I discovered there's this thing called Jade, but it's for Node.js. Jade looks like this, which in my opinion is a lot cleaner. But it's only available for JavaScript, so you can't use it in Ruby. Then I did some search, and I found Sling. But Sling at that time was very young. It was developed by this guy named Andrew Stone, and it was in its very early stage. It's in its infancy. So this is what a Sling template looks like. So you don't have percentage signs, you don't have to use hash rockets. So I decided to, hey, this actually looks pretty good. This is almost exactly what I want. So what I did was started contributing to it, and then made two pretty useful packages. One is the bundle for TextMate and Sublime for syntax highlighting. The other one is to convert Haml templates into Sling templates. Then this guy named Magnus Holm came along, and he actually made a pull request to change Sling's parser into using tempo and tilt. What this result did was that this is what the Sling compiler looked like before. It was composed by a bunch of regular expressions. It's pretty hard to maintain, pretty hard to understand. So this is what the new compiler looks like. It splits the original compiler into a parser and a compiler. The parser will parse your Sling templates into almost like a syntax tree, and the compiler will compile your templates from that. And then a guy named Daniel Mentler came along, and he made a bunch of useful contribution, and he actually remained to this day the most active committer for the project. So a lot of the great things is because of him, so it's great. So I also think that doing a bit of freelancing work can be very beneficial as well. They are like open source work, but with real deadlines and pressures and everything comes with it. You get to earn a bit of money as well. It's always good. And you get to be involved in different kinds of projects, the ones probably different than the ones in your day job. Communication skills with your clients, and perhaps with your remote team members as well, if you're because you spend most of your waking hours at your day job, I think you should make it count. You need to know what you're looking for out of the job, right? And then you need to make sure what can you get out of it. by working at this company, and once you moved on from it, what did you actually get out of that experience? I also think that personal branding is also quite important. Designers usually have online portfolios to showcase their wonderful designs. What about us developers? I think by having a blog will help, by using Twitter or Weibo will help, by having a GitHub account will definitely help, and perhaps a LinkedIn or some other kind of online CV services. I think personal branding is all about building up your network to establish your reputation within the industry and get people to endorse your work. So now we can talk the talk, let's walk the walk. How about a little fun task? A small code test. This is actually a portion of the code test that we use at Locomode before we get candidates to interview with us. So given there's an object, and we place the object on a grid, the object can be moved in 4 different directions, and it can't be moved off the grid. This is a bad solution. I think it's pretty obvious why it's a bad solution, because this candidate decided that humans are actually better than computers at manual labor work. And the rotation method to rotate the object is all defined manually as well. So that's bad. Here's another bad example. It's slightly better than the first one, but there's still a lot of checking inline stuff. There's a bidding rescue nil, which I don't know why it's there. It just doesn't look clean. And again, the rotation, left and right, all the directions are actually manually defined. Let's look at a good example. You initialize it with the grid, you place the object on the grid, all the logic is contained within that place method, proper checking, the use of Ruby's rotate method to rotate the campus, and then move and turn left and right. They're pretty easy to read. I think it's pretty good. There's another good example. Again, you define them by calculating the coordinates rather than just manually specifying them. And the left-right uses the rotate method as well. Once in a while, you will actually get something that you don't know what to think of. I think it'll blow your mind. So this is the initializer. Never mind the 4 spaces for indentation, and in one case 5 spaces. It uses class methods, class variables everywhere, and camel case, underscores. I don't know what to think of it. This is its main sort of implementation. You don't have to read it. It'll probably damage your brain cells, but just class variables everywhere. I think there's a 3 level of nesting, which is bad in Ruby. Maybe it's okay in Java or PHP. So that's my reaction after seeing that. So writing features is usually not enough. We need tests, right? But before I get to that, I'm going to show you a quote from Ken Beck. It says, "I get paid for code that works, not for tests. So my philosophy is to test as little as possible to reach a given level of confidence." So he doesn't recommend you to do like 100% test coverage. It's meaningless. So it's all about the effectiveness of your tests, right? So let's have an example. There's a couple of things wrong with this test case or this test file. First of all, the first 4 lines, they're describing active record behaviors. The mass assignments and belong to, those are declarative. There's really nothing to test. You're actually re-implementing your model logic here. Allow mass assignments on foreign keys, it's usually wrong. And these tests are actually how the methods are actually implemented. they're not testing the input-output, they're testing the actual implementation logic. So by writing this piece of code, we gain absolutely no confidence. And sometimes it's very easy to have duplicated tests because some of your objects or business logic are quite similar. So in this instance, there's a traveler, there's an authorizer. They look almost identical. Because we use RSpec, we can turn that into this. So we define a subject, so we can use this, the its block, to check the attributes for the given object, given subject. And then because the let blocks are lazily evaluated, you can actually define those in the let block before you even use them. So let's have a couple of examples of refactor. I think in the context of developing Rails, because I think a lot of us are actually web developers, we need to keep controllers clean, but how do we do that? This is an example that it was contained within a pull request that we received from the developer on the team. So there's, first of all, it's got a lot of instance variables. And because the Rails magic, instance variables are scoped between your controllers and your views, therefore it creates bindings between them. So in my opinion, you should have the least amount of instance variables as possible in your controllers. And then you have an after filter for just one single action. So maybe you don't need it after all. And then we're checking a parent object within a method. The method is called deliver message. It's for sending emails, but it's actually checking whether or not the message itself is persisted. I don't think that's the correct place to place that. And then you've got an, I guess, ambiguous 2 lines. I don't know why they're done that way. So this is the after cleanup. It's not heaps better, but I think it's slightly cleaner. Let's look at a more complex example. So we've got a problem. We have users in the system, right? Each user has a number of trips, but each trip may contain more than 1 stops. We only want to display the very first stop from each trip. So this is the code that I received. There's a couple of issues. First of all, there's dead code. This local variable is not being used anyway. Then there's a local variable that's only being used once. Then there's a implementation that reads very confusing. Flags nil or flags empty, and you return nil or the first flag. What does that mean? Then you have inline return nil. Then you use inject where you might not need to. Rescue nil. That's almost always bad. And you have the unless block that looks quite complicated and the indentation is wrong. And then you have model level details. SQL statements in your controller. That is bad. So this is after the cleanup. The developer gathered the feedback I gave him and came up with this. This is a lot nicer, isn't it? The controller has 1 action now. It has 1 instance variable, and then all the implementation details are actually contained within the model. But there's still one issue. This line here. This is actually still implementation details. By reading this line, you can't tell what it actually does without, looking at your models. So this is after that cleanup. Notice the first line. It just describes what it is and leave the implementation details in your user model instead. So I think that's a lot cleaner now. Let's have an example of Ruby China. Although it's an old example, the code doesn't exist on the repo anymore, but still, let's look at it. This is a method to check whether or not a thread's being read by a user. Never mind the, I guess, the wording of the method name is a bit weird, but duplication. The 2 pieces of code is actually exactly the same. And then you have this sort of 2 if statements that can potentially be combined. A lot of inline returns. That's not good. And the user ID, the local variable, is being used in two places within the same if statement. First thing you do, I guess, is to add tests. Without tests, you don't know what your refactor is going to do. So add tests to ensure that everything works. That's after the refactor. I think that's a lot cleaner. It's a lot easier to understand. Certainly no duplication anyway. I think that's good. So I think refactor is quite fun actually. The other day I was looking at our source code and I noticed this. Results TMC. TMC is an acronym that stands for Travel Management Companies. Normally, just by convention, I like to keep controllers in plural. So this controller obviously is in its singular form. And it looks a bit weird, so I decided, hey, let's change that to resources TMC. That's more readable. That's by convention, right? Then I got this routing error. An initialized constant admin TMC's controller. So I was like, why? How come? So I made sure that our controller names are correct, file names are correct, the inflector is actually set correctly as well. So what's going on there? Why is Rails complaining about routing error? It turns out it's a known issue. Someone else reported that about a month ago, I think. So it's start debugging time. It's obviously a bug in Rails. It turns out it's this piece of code in the inflector. It's the underscore method. The regular expression apparently is too aggressive. So that's the correct implementation. After you made the changes, I think it's always a good idea to actually add the test to make sure the test pass. But that's not enough. Oops, sorry. You need to ensure all tests pass, right? There's no regression bugs. And then you issue a pull request. And hopefully someone will get to look at it and it'll get released within the next Rails release. And I think we are actually a very fortunate bunch. I think we need to embrace Ruby. These are the methods that's contained within the Rails source code. This is part of Active Record. The way Active Record persists your model in the database. It's quite neat. It's very easy to understand, to follow, and to debug, perhaps. Compared to that to this. This is part of a source code from a very popular PHP framework. That's the sort of equivalent save function, which is, I think it's almost 400 lines of code. I have no idea how they unit test that. I don't think that's physically possible. So yeah, I think we should embrace Ruby. Ruby is a wonderful, beautiful language, and paired with Rails, I think it'll do a lot of good things. And that's it. Thanks.